Ambassador Kim Min-soo had been standing in this same spot for 3 hours now. His once crisp blue diplomatic uniform hung in tatters, stained with his own blood from the questioning session. The aliens called it an interrogation, but Min-soo knew torture when he felt it. His left shoulder throbbed where they had dislocated it, and his face was swollen from repeated strikes. The chamber around him was massive, built to intimidate. The walls stretched up so high that the ceiling disappeared into darkness. Thousands of alien beings filled the curved seats, their eyes fixed on him like he was some kind of specimen. The tentacled Aquarians floated in their water-filled viewing pods, their slimy appendages tapping against the glass. The synthetic collective had sent their chrome-plated drones, their red optical sensors scanning him constantly. Most terrifying were the Titans, 12-foot-tall beings made of living rock, their boulder-like faces showing no emotion at all. Min-soo had been Earth's ambassador for 6 years. He had shaken hands, tentacles, and claws with hundreds of alien species. He had learned their customs, spoken their languages, and tried to build bridges between humanity and the galaxy. Now those same beings were here to watch him die. Council Executor Vexthul rose from the judgment seat. The creature looked like a walking crystal formation, its body made of sharp, glowing minerals that clinked together when it moved. Its voice came from somewhere inside its chest, mechanical and cold like a broken radio. Human-designated Kim Min-soo, it announced, the words echoing through the chamber. You stand accused of crimes against galactic order. Your species has established colonies in sectors marked as forbidden. You have built settlements on worlds designated as preserve zones. You have violated the sacred boundaries accord signed by your own government 23 years ago. Min-soo tried to speak, but his throat was raw. He had already explained everything during the interrogation. The colonies were legal under the expansion clauses. The settlements were on dead worlds that no other species wanted. Everything had been approved through proper channels. But the Council didn't want to hear explanations, they wanted an example. The human colonies were authorized, Min-soo finally croaked out. We followed every protocol. We submitted every form. We waited for approval before we moved a single family. Vexthul's crystal body flashed brighter. Irrelevant. The boundaries exist for the protection of all species. Humans reproduce too, quickly. You expand too aggressively. You consume resources without regard for others. The Council has decided that humanity must be contained. The word contained sent a chill down Min-soo's spine. He had heard rumors about what happened to species that were contained. The Zephyrians had been contained 50 years ago. No one had seen a Zephyrian since. We are not your enemies, Min-soo said, forcing strength into his voice. Humanity has contributed to galactic civilization. Our technology, our art, our medical advances have helped every species in this council. We seek partnership, not domination. The Aquarian representative gurgled something in their liquid language. The universal translator rendered it as, humans are a plague species. They must be stopped before they spread further. One of the synthetic drones spoke in perfect monotone. Statistical analysis confirms human expansion rate exceeds acceptable parameters. Probability of resource conflict, 97%. A Titan's voice rumbled like an earthquake. They breed like insects. They will consume everything. Min-soo looked around the chamber, searching for any friendly face. The Kovani delegation sat in the upper levels, their feathered heads bowed. They had traded with humanity for decades, but they wouldn't meet his eyes now. The Milani, with their large, gentle eyes, seemed sad, but stayed silent. Fear had made cowards of them all. You make your decision based on fear, Min-soo said, his voice growing stronger. Fear of what we might become instead of seeing what we are. We came to you in peace. We shared our knowledge freely. We asked only for the right to grow alongside you as equals. Vexthul raised one crystalline arm. The chamber fell silent, except for the hum of life support systems and the splash of water in the Aquarian tanks. The sentence is death, the executor announced. Let all species witness what happens to those who defy galactic law. Let this human's death serve as warning to his kind. Min-soo straightened his shoulders despite the pain. He thought of his wife Jin-ae back on Earth, of their 2 children who were just starting school. He thought of the colonists on New Jeju, families who had left everything behind to build new lives among the stars. He thought of humanity's dreams of joining the galactic community as partners, not subjects. "I have final words," he said. Vexthul nodded once. "Speak." Minsu looked directly into the crystal being's glowing core. His voice rang clear and strong across the silent chamber. "Earth remembers its children." The plasma beam struck him in the chest. The energy was so intense that his body simply vaporized, leaving only a brief flash of light that could be seen through the chamber's transparent dome, visible even from orbital stations above. The execution was broadcast live across hundreds of worlds, meant to show the galaxy what happened to species that challenged the established order. The aliens in the chamber began to file out, satisfied that justice had been served. They believed they had sent a clear message to humanity. They thought they had crushed human ambition before it could threaten their comfortable, controlled galaxy. They had no idea what they had just unleashed. Earth's children were about to remind the galaxy why humanity had clawed its way from caves to stars and why they had never learned to kneel. General Park Ji-ho was drinking his morning coffee when the message arrived. The steaming cup sat forgotten on his desk as he watched Ambassador Kim Min-soo die on the holographic display. The plasma beam turned a good man into nothing more than light and ash. Park had known Min-soo personally. They had served together during the border wars 20 years ago, back when humanity's only enemies were other humans. Park's hands trembled as he reached for the sealed vault beneath his desk. Not from grief, though his heart ached for his old friend. Not from fear, though he knew what was coming next. His hands shook with pure white-hot rage that had been building in his chest since the moment Min-soo's body disappeared. The vault required 3 different biometric scans and a code that changed every hour. Inside lay a single red folder marked with warnings in 12 languages, the Annihilation Protocol. Every human military officer knew it existed, but they all hoped it would never be opened. Park had helped write parts of it 15 years ago, back when some politicians worried that humanity might face exactly this situation. The first page was simple. Just 5 words. When diplomacy fails, war begins. Park's fingers moved across his command console with practiced efficiency. He had been Earth's senior military commander for 8 years, but he had never sent orders like these, emergency frequencies, crackled to life across 43 star systems as automated messages began transmitting simultaneously. The orders were identical everywhere. All civilian personnel return to designated safe zones immediately. All military assets assume combat readiness. All colonial governments implement Emergency Protocol 7. No explanations were given, but none were needed. Every human settlement from the outer rim to the core worlds knew what these codes meant. On New Busan Colony, Captain Lee So-young was supervising the morning shift change when her communicator started screaming. The emergency tone made everyone in the control room freeze. She had heard that sound only twice before, both during training exercises. "All civilians to evacuation transports immediately," she announced over the colony-wide intercom. Her voice stayed calm even as her heart raced. "This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill." New Busan was home to 60,000 people, mostly families who had come here to farm the rich soil and breathe clean air under twin suns. They had built schools and parks and shopping centers. Children played in streets lined with earth trees that had been carefully transported across the galaxy. It was supposed to be humanity's showcase, proof that they could build something beautiful among the stars. Now it was being abandoned. The evacuation took 18 hours. Massive transport ships landed in the colony's central plaza, their cargo. Holds modified to carry people instead of goods. Families climbed aboard with whatever they could carry. Children clutched toys while parents tried to explain why they had to leave their homes. The elderly needed help walking up the transport ramps, their faces confused and frightened. Captain Lee stood on the observation deck as the last transport lifted off. Below her, the colony's automated defense systems were powering up. Weapon emplacements rose from hidden bunkers. Shield generators hummed to life. Energy barriers flickered into existence around critical facilities. New Busan was transforming from a peaceful farming community into a fortress. She was the last human to leave. Her transport lifted off just as the colony's defensive grid activated fully. From space, New Busan looked like a jewel surrounded by deadly light. Similar scenes played out across human space. On Kepler Station, families packed onto cargo haulers, while military personnel sealed the station's blast doors. On New Seoul, children who had never seen Earth boarded ships bound for a homeworld. They knew only from pictures. On Harmony, the agricultural world that fed 6 nearby systems, farmers abandoned crops that were only weeks from harvest. The evacuations weren't panicked. Humanity had learned from its bloody history on Earth. Every colony had evacuation plans. Every family knew where to go and what to do. The massive population movement happened with grim efficiency. Admiral Choi Hyun-woo commanded the 3rd Fleet from his flagship, the battlecruiser Incheon. His ships had been conducting routine patrol operations near the neutral zone when the recall orders arrived. 47 warships, from massive dreadnoughts to small destroyer escorts, suddenly changed course and headed for deep space. All ships, full communication blackout, Choi ordered. Deactivate all transponders, switch to quantum encryption only. The 3rd Fleet vanished from galactic sensors as completely as if they had never existed. Their destinations were known only to Choi and his senior officers. The fleet split into smaller task forces, each heading to coordinates that weren't on any public star charts. Other fleets across human space received similar orders. The 2nd Fleet disappeared near the Vegan colonies. The 5th Fleet vanished while conducting exercises near Alpha Centauri. Even civilian shipping companies began moving their vessels to hidden locations, following contingency plans that had been filed away and forgotten until now. The Galactic Council's monitoring stations detected the massive movement of human ships and personnel, but they couldn't track where everyone was going. Humanity's merchant marine and colonial fleet were larger than most species realized. When they decided to disappear, they simply vanished into the vast darkness between stars. Back. On Earth, General Park watched the reports flowing in from across human space. 43 colony worlds were now empty of civilians, but bristling with defenses. 8 major fleets had gone dark. Thousands of smaller ships were moving to positions known only to their crews. The evacuation was proceeding faster than even the most optimistic projections. The Galactic Council thought they had sent humanity a message by executing Minsu. They believed they had shown the galaxy what happened to species that stepped out of line. They expected humanity to submit, to accept whatever boundaries and restrictions the Council imposed. They were about to learn their greatest mistake. Humanity's restraint hadn't been weakness. It had been a choice, and that choice had just been revoked. Nexus Prime had stood for 3,000 years as the symbol of galactic order. The massive world fortress orbited a dying star, its surface covered in crystalline towers that reached into space itself. Council fleets docked at orbital platforms the size of cities. Millions of beings from hundreds of species lived and worked in its gleaming spires. It was supposed to be unconquerable, protected by energy shields that could stop entire fleets and weapons that could crack planets. At 0347 Galactic Standard Time, Nexus Prime simply ceased to exist. The attack came from nowhere. Galactic sensors showed empty space one moment, then registered massive energy readings the next. Something had torn a hole in reality itself, reaching through dimensions that most species didn't even know existed. The quantum fire that erupted from that tear consumed everything it touched. The fortress world's shield, strong enough to stop a supernova, lasted exactly 4 seconds. The weapon platforms, armed with city-killing plasma cannons, fired once, before being vaporized. The orbital docks, filled with Council warships, became expanding clouds of superheated metal. Nexus Prime itself, a world that had housed the galaxy's most powerful government, became nothing more than glowing particles scattered across the star system. Half the Galactic Council's entire fleet died in those first 30 seconds. Ships that had never lost a battle, crews that had conquered rebellious worlds, admirals who had commanded fleets for centuries, all gone in a flash of impossible fire. The lucky ones died instantly. The unlucky ones had time to send emergency signals before the quantum flames reached them. Across the galaxy, the signals arrived simultaneously. Nexus Prime is gone. Nexus Prime is gone. Unknown weapon, unknown attacker. Send help, send, then silence. 6 hours later, the first human ship appeared at Kepler Gate, the major hyperspace junction that connected the core worlds to the outer rim. The massive dreadnought that emerged from fold space looked like nothing in the galactic databases. Its hull was scarred black, as if it had been forged in the heart of a star. Weapon ports covered every surface, some small enough to target fighters, others large enough to crack moons. The ship's name was written in human script along its bow, Minsu's Vengeance. Captain Yoon Jae-min stood on the bridge of his dreadnought, watching the tactical display as Council ships moved to intercept him. 19 warships from 7 different species, all converging on his position. The largest was a Titan stone ship, its rocky hull bristling with mass drivers. The fastest were Aquarian torpedo boats, their sleek hulls cutting through space like swimming predators. Captain, his tactical officer reported, enemy fleet is demanding our surrender. They're threatening to open fire if we don't comply. Yoon almost smiled. These aliens still thought they were in charge. They still believed they could make demands of humanity. They had learned nothing from watching Minsu die, nothing from seeing Nexus Prime burn. Open all communication channels, Yoon ordered. All frequencies, all languages. The bridge fell silent except for the hum of the ship's quantum engines. Yoon had served in the colonial fleet for 15 years, fighting pirates and defending merchant convoys. He had always followed the rules of engagement, always tried to minimize casualties, always sought peaceful solutions when possible. Those days were over. "This is Captain Yoon Jae-min of the human warship Minsu's Vengeance," he broadcast across the galaxy. "3 days ago, your council murdered our ambassador in cold blood. You executed a man who came to you seeking peace. You broadcast his death as a warning to all humanity." The council ships continued their approach, weapons charging. Energy readings spiked as they prepared to fire. They outnumbered him 19-1. By every tactical calculation in galactic military history, Yoon should have surrendered. "We offered you partnership," Yoon continued, his voice carrying across 1,000 star systems. "We shared our knowledge freely. We asked only for the right to grow alongside you as equals. You answered with murder." The first shots came from the Titan stone ship, massive kinetic projectiles that could punch through planetary crusts. They struck the Minsu's Vengeance dead center and simply vanished, absorbed by defensive systems that shouldn't have existed. "You made one critical error," Yoon said as his ship's weapons began to charge. "You assumed our restraint was weakness. You thought our desire for peace meant we couldn't wage war. You believed that because we chose mercy, we were incapable of vengeance." The dreadnought's main guns fired once. The energy beams that erupted from its weapon ports weren't plasma or particle streams, or any technology the galaxy recognized. They were concentrated space-time distortions, weapons that turned physics itself into ammunition. Where they struck, reality twisted and broke. The Titan stone ship, 3 kilometers of solid rock and metal, folded in on itself like paper being crumpled. The Aquarian torpedo boats moved so fast that they outran their own destruction by milliseconds before space-time, caught up with them. Synthetic collective drones, their quantum processors trying to calculate impossible physics, simply shut down as their logic circuits overloaded. The battle lasted 8 minutes and 17 seconds, when the weapon fire stopped and the space-time. Distortions settled back to normal. Debris from 19 council ships drifted in expanding clouds. Some pieces were recognizable as hull plating or engine components. Most were just atoms that had been rearranged into new configurations by weapons that treated the laws of physics as suggestions. The Minsu's Vengeance hung motionless in space, its black hull unmarked by enemy fire. Around it, the wreckage of what had been considered one of the galaxy's most powerful task forces slowly tumbled in the vacuum. Captain Yoon opened the communication channels again. His voice was calm, almost conversational, as if he had just finished a routine training exercise, instead of annihilating an entire fleet. "We offered you civilization," he said to the listening galaxy. "We brought you art and music and stories. We shared our medicine and our technology. We asked for nothing but the chance to stand beside you as friends and equals. You chose extinction instead. The transmission ended, but its meaning was clear to every species that heard it. Humanity had revealed its true nature at last. The peaceful diplomats and eager colonists had been masks, hiding something far more dangerous underneath. The galaxy was finally seeing what humans looked like when they stopped pretending to be civilized. Emergency sessions convened on a dozen worlds as government leaders tried to understand what had just happened. Military analysts studied the sensor readings from Kepler Gate, trying to comprehend weapons that violated known physics. Scientists examined the quantum signatures from the Nexus Prime attack, searching for explanations that made sense. They found none. Humanity had just demonstrated technology that was centuries ahead of anything in galactic databases. The species that had begged for membership in the Council, that had accepted restrictions and boundaries with apparent humility, had been hiding capabilities that made the rest of the galaxy look primitive. The most terrifying realization came from the Corvani Intelligence Service. The humans had been holding back. Everything they had shown the galaxy before, their ships, their weapons, their technology, had been deliberately limited versions of what they actually possessed. They had been playing by galactic rules not because they had to, but because they chose to. That choice had just ended. Commander Han Soo-jin floated in the darkness between stars, her stealth ship invisible to every sensor in the galaxy. The silent wind was smaller than most shuttles, but it carried enough firepower to cripple a space station. More importantly, it carried something the aliens had never encountered before, a human who understood that sometimes you had to break things to fix them. Her target was Communication Hub Zeta-7, a massive relay station that handled hyperspace messages for 12 entire sectors. The station was the size of a small moon, covered in transmission arrays that could send signals across the galaxy in hours instead of years. Millions of messages passed through its quantum processors every day, from love letters between separated families to military orders coordinating fleet movements. Soo-jin had been watching the station for 3 days, learning its patterns. She knew when the shift changes happened, when the automated maintenance cycles ran, when the skeleton crew took their breaks. The station's defenses were impressive by galactic standards, but they were designed to stop large fleets, not a single small ship with technology that bent the rules of physics. "Beginning approach," she whispered into her communicator. Her words would travel instantly to similar ships scattered across the galaxy, each preparing to strike their own targets. 12 sectors, 12 communication hubs, 12 simultaneous attacks that would blind the Galactic Council's ability to coordinate their response. The silent wind slipped past the station's patrol ships like a ghost. Soo-jin's stealth technology didn't just hide her ship from sensors, it erased her from reality itself, folding space around her vessel so that it existed in a bubble outside normal physics. The aliens' detection systems couldn't find what technically wasn't there. She docked with the station's maintenance port, her ship's AI mimicking the access codes of a routine supply delivery. The station's computer systems welcomed her aboard, completely unaware that they had just invited death into their heart. Soo-jin moved through the station's corridors with practiced silence. She had trained for missions like this on Earth's moon, in facilities that recreated alien architectures and gravity conditions. The station's crew were Milani, gentle beings with large eyes and soft voices who had never harmed anyone in their 3-century lifespans. Under different circumstances, Soo-jin might have felt sorry for them. Today was not about mercy. The main computer core was protected by multiple security layers, but Soo-jin carried something that made locks irrelevant, a quantum virus designed by Earth's best programmers. She plugged her data spike into the core's primary access port and watched as humanity's gift to galactic civilization began its work. The virus didn't destroy the station's systems. Instead, it took control of them. Within minutes, every communication relay in 12 sectors began broadcasting the same message on every frequency. The execution footage of Ambassador Kim Min-soo, followed by Captain Yoon's declaration from Kepler Gate. The galaxy would hear humanity's words whether they wanted to or not, but the virus did more than hijack communications. It began systematically overloading the station's power grid, creating feedback loops that would spread to every connected facility. Communication Hub Zeta 7 and its 11 sister stations would tear themselves apart from the inside, taking decades of infrastructure with them. Su Jin was back on her ship and jumping to hyperspace when the first explosions began. Behind her, one of the galaxy's most important communication nodes dissolved into expanding clouds of plasma and twisted metal. Across the galaxy, similar scenes played out as human strike teams hit targets that no one had thought to protect. The aliens had prepared for fleet battles and planetary invasions, but they had never imagined that humans would attack the invisible infrastructure that held galactic civilization together. Trade routes that had operated safely for centuries became death traps overnight. Human stealth fighters, invisible to alien sensors, began hunting merchant convoys like wolves stalking sheep. The attacks were surgical and terrifying. A cargo ship carrying medical supplies would suddenly find its engines dead and its life support failing. Before the crew could send a distress call, human boarders would appear as if from nowhere, seize the ship's contents, and vanish back into the void. The humans didn't kill the crews unless they had to. They left them alive in disabled ships, broadcasting emergency signals that other vessels would hear. The message was clear. The galaxy's trade networks existed only because humanity allowed them to exist. On the crystalline world of Zerion, engineer Kim Da-eun sat in a coffee shop, sipping tea and watching the local news. She looked like any other human tourist, visiting one of the galaxy's most beautiful worlds to see the famous crystal gardens that grew in spiraling towers toward the sky. The Zerions were proud of their world, especially their planetary defense system that could supposedly stop any invasion fleet. They had no idea that their defense system was about to destroy their own cities. Da-eun's virus had been spreading through Zerion's computer networks for weeks, disguised as routine software updates and security patches. It hid in the millions of lines of code that controlled everything from traffic lights to orbital defense platforms. The Zerion's own maintenance systems helped it spread, distributing the virus to every connected device on the planet. When Da-eun activated the final trigger from her tablet, the results were immediate and catastrophic. Defense satellites designed to protect Zerion from attack began firing on the planet's surface. Automated factories started producing toxic gases instead of consumer goods. Transportation networks rerouted hovercars into buildings. The crystal gardens that had grown for thousands of years began shattering as their environmental systems reversed their functions. The Zerion's crystalline bodies made them excellent conductors of electricity, but that same property made them vulnerable when their own power grid turned against them. Emergency services tried to respond, but their communication systems had been compromised. Every time they thought they had contained one disaster, 3 more erupted elsewhere. Within hours, Zerion's gleaming cities had become death traps built by their own technology. The planetary government begged for help, but their calls for assistance went unanswered. The communication networks that should have carried their pleas were either destroyed or under human control. Similar attacks struck at the heart of galactic civilization. On the gas giant mining stations of Kepler 442, human cyber weapons turned atmospheric processors into bombs. On the trading hub of New Geneva, financial networks began transferring the galaxy's wealth to accounts that didn't exist. On the military world of Fortress Prime, automated defense systems locked their own crews inside bunkers and flooded them with sleeping gas. The humans weren't trying to conquer these worlds. They were demonstrating how completely vulnerable the galaxy had become. Every computer system, every network, every piece of technology that connected the far-flung worlds of galactic civilization had been infiltrated by human programmers who understood alien systems better than their creators. The once mighty Galactic Council chambers, rebuilt in emergency session on a backup facility, echoed with the voices of terrified representatives. The great amphitheater that had once held thousands now contained only dozens of survivors. Species that had ruled sectors of space for millennia sat in stunned silence as reports poured in from across the galaxy. The Aquarian delegate's voice bubbled with panic as she reported that their underwater cities were flooding because their own environmental systems had turned against them. The synthetic collective's representatives spoke in monotone about cascading system failures that were consuming their machine worlds. The Titans sat motionless, their stone faces showing no emotion, but their silence spoke volumes. For 3,000 years, they had built a civilization based on the assumption that they were the galaxy's dominant powers. They had created laws and boundaries and restrictions based on their own superiority over younger species. They had executed Ambassador Minsu to send a message about what happened to those who challenged their authority. Now they were learning the truth they had been too arrogant to see. Humanity's diplomatic missions hadn't been attempts at submission. They had been acts of mercy. When humans asked for permission to expand their colonies, they hadn't been acknowledging the Council's authority. They had been offering the Council a chance to participate in decisions that humans could have made unilaterally. Every handshake, every treaty, every compromise had been humanity giving the galaxy a choice: work together or be swept aside. The Council had chosen to execute the messenger instead of hearing the message. Now they understood what humanity looked like when it stopped asking for permission and started taking what it wanted. The galaxy was burning, and the fires had been lit by the same species that had once begged for acceptance into galactic society. The most terrifying realization was slowly dawning on the surviving Council members. This wasn't humanity's full strength. The attacks were too precise, too controlled. The humans were still holding back, still showing mercy by limiting their destruction. They were demonstrating their power, not unleashing it completely. The galaxy was seeing what humans could do when they chose violence over diplomacy. None of the survivors wanted to discover what humanity looked like when it stopped choosing at all. The emergency council chambers were a pathetic shadow of their former glory. Built hastily in the ruins of a mining station, the temporary facility leaked atmosphere and flickered with failing lights. Where once thousands of representatives had gathered in gleaming halls, now barely 50 aliens huddled in cramped quarters, jumping at every sound and shadow. Fleet Admiral Song Min-ho walked through the broken entrance without ceremony. His black uniform was clean and pressed, a stark contrast to the oil-stained walls and jury-rigged life support systems around him. Behind him marched 12 human marines, their weapons holstered, but their presence unmistakable. The aliens in the chamber pressed themselves against the walls as the humans passed, like prey animals trying to avoid a predator's notice. Song had commanded fleets for 20 years, but he had never imagined he would stand in a place like this. The proud Galactic Council, rulers of 1,000 worlds, reduced to refugees in their own space. The crystalline Vorthak representatives sat in chunks of broken crystal, their once magnificent forms cracked and dim. The Aquarian delegates floated in portable tanks barely large enough to hold them, their tentacles curled in submission. "Citizens of the galaxy," Song began, his voice carrying easily through the small chamber. 3 weeks ago you executed our ambassador. You broadcast his death across the stars as a warning to humanity. You believed you were teaching us our place in your galactic order. The Titan representative, a massive being of living stone, tried to speak. "Admiral, we can negotiate." Song raised his hand and the alien fell silent immediately. The gesture was simple, almost casual, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. Everyone in the chamber understood that this human could end their lives with a word. "You will listen," Song continued. "When I am finished, you may speak. Not before." He walked to the center of the chamber, his boots echoing on the metal floor. Through the cracked windows, the shapes of human warships were visible against the stars. The fleet that surrounded this station was larger than any force the galaxy had ever assembled, and it was just a fraction of humanity's total military power. "We came to you 30 years ago with open hands and peaceful hearts. We shared our art, our music, our scientific discoveries. We asked only for the right to exist alongside you as equals. We followed your laws, respected your boundaries, and sought your approval for our every action." Song's voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath the words that made every alien in the chamber flinch. "We offered you partnership. You demanded submission. We offered cooperation. You imposed restrictions. We offered friendship. You responded with execution. The Milani delegate, her large eyes filled with tears, whispered something that the translators rendered as, "We were afraid." Song looked at her directly. "Yes, you were afraid. Afraid of change. Afraid of losing your comfortable positions. Afraid that a younger species might prove your superiority was an illusion, so you chose to kill our representative rather than face your fears." He pulled out a data pad and activated it. Holographic displays showed star charts, fleet positions, and casualty reports from across the galaxy. The numbers were staggering. Millions of alien military personnel dead or missing, entire sectors cut off from communication, trade networks collapsed, governments fallen. In the past 3 weeks, humanity has dismantled 3,000 years of galactic civilization. Your fleets are scattered debris. Your communication networks are under our control. Your worlds exist at our discretion, and we accomplish this while holding back the vast majority of our capabilities. The Synthetic Collective's representative, a chrome-plated being with glowing optical sensors, processed this information and spoke in its mechanical voice. Query: what are your terms for cessation of hostilities? Song smiled, but it was not a pleasant expression. Terms? You misunderstand the situation. This is not a negotiation. This is not a treaty between equals. This is surrender. He gestured to one of his Marines, who stepped forward carrying a thick document bound in human leather. The sight of it made several aliens recoil visibly. This is the new Galactic Constitution. It bears Earth's seal and humanity's authority. You will sign it, or your species will cease to exist. The Vorthak representative's crystal body flashed with indignation. You cannot simply impose your will on the entire galaxy. There are laws, precedents. Your laws died with Ambassador Kim Min-soo, Song interrupted. Your precedents burned with Nexus Prime. The only law that matters now is this: those who can unmake everything hold the right to remake it in their image. He opened the document and began reading key passages. The terms were harsh, but not genocidal. Alien species could continue to exist, but under strict human oversight. Military forces would be limited to local defense only. Interstellar trade would be regulated by human authorities. Most importantly, no alien government could make decisions affecting other species without human approval. "Why not simply exterminate us?" asked the Aquarian delegate, her voice bubbling with despair. "You clearly have the power." Song closed the document and looked around the chamber at the assembled representatives. These beings had once ruled Star systems and commanded the loyalty of billions. Now they cowered before a single human who spoke with quiet authority. "Because unlike you, we understand the value of life. We could have turned every alien world into glass and ash. We could have wiped out your species entirely. Instead, we chose to demonstrate our power and offer you survival under our protection." Captain Lim Ye-jin entered the chamber, her peacekeeping uniform crisp and professional. She whispered something in Song's ear and he nodded. "Captain Lim reports that our terraforming ships have begun seeding the dead worlds of the Outer Rim with Earth-born life. Trees and grass are growing on planets that have been barren for millions of years. Our agricultural specialists are establishing food production facilities to ensure no world goes hungry. Our medical teams are treating alien refugees in facilities we've constructed from our own resources." Song walked closer to the alien representatives, and they instinctively pressed themselves further back. "You see, this is what you never understood about humanity. We are not conquerors who seek to rule through fear. We are gardeners who shape the universe to our vision. We could have been partners in that work, but you chose to make yourselves obstacles instead." The signing ceremony took 3 hours. One by one, the representatives of 47 different species put their marks on the human constitution. Some signed with trembling appendages, others wept as they signed. The Titans carved their names in stone tablets that human technicians scanned into the official record. When it was finished, Song stood before the assembled aliens one final time. "You exist now by our permission alone. Your worlds continue because we allow them to continue. Your children will grow up in a galaxy shaped by human values and protected by human strength. If you serve faithfully, you will find us benevolent. Masters, if you rebel, you will discover why we offered you mercy only once. As the humans left the chamber, alien representatives sat in stunned silence. The galaxy they had known was gone, replaced by something that bore humanity's fingerprints on every star and world. Human ships patrolled every trade route. Human administrators governed every major decision. Human terraforming vessels transformed barren worlds into gardens that would feed the galaxy's population. The Galactic Council had taught humanity a harsh lesson. Diplomacy only worked between equals. When one side held all the power, negotiations became dictation. The aliens had chosen to make humanity unequal by murdering their ambassador. Now they were learning what it meant to live in a galaxy where humans no longer pretended to be anything less than the dominant species. The universe itself had become humanity's garden, and everyone else lived in it by permission. The age of galactic democracy was over. The age of human hegemony had begun.